Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday, midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, as always, big shout-out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, today we're going to break down the markets with Neil Townsend of GrainFox, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Lots happening. We got some USDA reports recently looking at some of the ending stocks. We got some dryness in parts of North America and different parts of the globe. What impact do some of the geopolitical, like things like tariffs and the Russia-Ukraine war, and how does that overlay with some of the fundamentals, and what does that mean for the markets going forward? Of course, if you think back to the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index results we talked about last week, we know that farmers are feeling there's a feeling of bullishness. The markets have an opportunity to go higher slightly. We were a little bit in bullish territory, but that's how farmers are feeling, although there is a little bit of a lack of confidence in the marketing plan. That's what we've got Neil here to fill in some of the gaps and maybe boost up some of that confidence in our marketing plans around these commodity markets as we're putting some seed in the ground. Okay. We're also going to hear from Holly Little. She is with Acadian Plant Health in a product spotlight. We're going to hear from Ethan Lane of NCBA. A lot of trade activity from a U.S. perspective. We saw President Trump, the Trump trade team, Scott Bessent, was in Geneva on the weekend talking to China. There was some news out on Monday morning about that. We had the U.K. trade deal. Canadian exporters working very hard, competing in some of those same markets, some of the people at CCA. So we're going to hear the U.S. perspective today with Ethan Lane. Looking forward to that. We're also going to spend some time today looking at safety for farmers around hydro lines or power lines as well. We're going to have a discussion with Manitoba Hydro today on the show as well. Some things to think about. There's been some recent incidents in Manitoba and want to create some awareness around that. Also, what I've seen is some pictures on social media about people running drills into overpasses mistakenly. That is not good. That is not good for the drill, their seeder, or the overpass in some of those pictures. Indeed. Now, if you have feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Been getting lots of feedback on the cabinet appointments from yesterday. I think a lot of people, I wrote a post about I think not only but the industry's disappointment with Cody Blois being left off that roster in terms of the cabinet. It sounds like there's rumors floating around that Mr. Blois may have some sort of a role closer to the PM being announced next week. So we'll stay tuned for that and see what is in store for Cody Blois from Kings Hunts, the former chair of the Ag Committee. And congratulations to Heath MacDonald, who is the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, where we've been reaching out to Mr. MacDonald's team, trying to get him on the show here. Want to hear his perspectives. Where are some of his priorities? Where does he plan on spending, some of his time? And what are some of the areas that he thinks need to be getting more attention? A lot of promises from the Carney government in terms of making improvements with some of the departments. AFC would be included in that. How deep does that reform or that modernization go? That's a big question. And where does trade fit into the agenda in combination, of course, with, as the Carney government has promised, to protect supply management? So looking forward to talking to Mr. MacDonald in the near future. And once again, congratulations. I think we can provide a bit of some tips for him, a bit of a heads up, maybe give him some help if there are AFC staffers that are listening to this show, I know you're out there, and maybe in the future, Mr. MacDonald himself. Back in April last month, RealAgristudies asked a number of policy questions to our RealAgristudies Insights panel. What is the impact of these policy issues, and do they deserve more attention? And we created kind of I guess essentially a net score. And what is quite fascinating, to be honest with you, is there's 3-4 key things that really producers are saying, hey, I think this needs more attention. I'll be honest with you. So what we have is in the areas of, well, the most impactful policies, I guess I'll start there. The most impactful policies for farmers: public plant breeding, crop insurance subsidies, value-added processing, and access to credit and financing. Those are the most positive policies in terms of having impact on producers. The most negative was pesticide regulations and also environmental programs such as off-calf. Okay, not a surprise there. So when we look at how much attention's being given to some of those policies, we're able to create a net score. And what the production here is, from a gap analysis standpoint, is where do farmers think the current government should be spending their time, right? Because there's a gap here between what's important versus where the focus is. And what we see is, here's the areas. The biggest, value-added processing. Makes sense. The issue here is this gets us out of the raw commodity business. And listen, it's not the case in the situation of the current China tariffs on canola oil and meal. You know, typically the tariffs are on the base commodity, like canola seed. In this case, it's meal and oil. That's a little bit more rare. And typically, the further you move up that value chain, the less likely you are to get hammered with some sort of trade spat retaliation. So we have value-added processing. Then we have trade and market access negotiation. This is a key one. I think farmers and ranchers across Canada really want to see this government focus more on trade. Now, in this case, the new trade minister does not have 6 portfolios. We'll have to see where the focus is and how, even if it's just more messaging around trade, that would be kind of refreshing in comparison to the Trudeau government. So we have trade and market access negotiation. We have crop insurance subsidies, which I thought it was interesting. And then we have public plant breeding. I'm very curious where the current government goes with AFC and its public plant breeding facilities and its program. There's always been a bit of a criticism that AFC has not been very clear in terms of what the future holds. Mixed messaging, mixed action, depending on who the audience is. It was interesting. We had Seeds Canada and Tyler McCann from Cappy on the show not too long ago, talking about, could that SVUA be a funding mechanism for public plant breeding going forward? I know some people really agreed with that, and some people were very pushed back hard on that concept. But public plant breeding is an area where farmers feel there's an opportunity to really provide some focus. Then we have labor negotiations for railways and terminals. Yes, that is one. We'll see. We're in a bit of a low period in terms of, we had so many strikes and so many issues last year. It's hard to imagine that 2025 would be like 24, but that farmers know that has impacted them. Well, we'll see if there's a different attitude around some of the union activity and some of the labor relations in contrast to the Trudeau government. I think we should take a bit of a wait and see approach there. And finally, the other I guess policy that farmers are saying, hey, this needs to get more attention, is access to credit and financing. And whether it's just operating loans in order to just feed the beast and have the farm operate on a daily and weekly, monthly basis, and some of the cash requirements, or some of the capital financing when it applies to things like land and buildings and the infrastructure required to make the business happen. those are things that are very important as well. And obviously, Farm Credit Canada is going to play a big role in any sort of future endeavors or plans or goal setting that the government's going to have around access to credit and financing in the agricultural sector, followed by those Schedule 1 banks. Farmer said in the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, is in terms of is right now a good time to be making farm investments. Speaking of that access to credit, we were a little bit up, right? We were 60 out of 200, which is up from 54, but still down from last October, which was 69. So we're kind of floated sort of sideways here in terms of whether or not farmers feel it's a good time to be investing, making those farm capital in investments. Do you have any feedback on any of these policies? Are there ones that didn't shine that you think need to get more attention? Like, I didn't mention biofuels. That's one that showed up on our list, but it wasn't in the top tier of things that farmers want to see the government focus on. Agri-stability reform was another one worth a mention. Foreign worker access, pesticide regulation, municipal government policy. It was interesting. Actually, farmers thought there should be more attention to municipal government policy than pesticide regulation, which I thought kind of was interesting. So anyway, lots of stuff to discuss there. We'd love your feedback. Haney at RealAgriculture.com. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've got Neil Townsend of GrainFox with us right after this.
I am your host, Lindsay Smith. Joining me now, Scott Bishop, the National Sales Manager for Exotic Technologies. What is Invita? How does it fit into farmers' operations?
Invita is a naturally occurring bacteria. What this bacteria is able to do is capture that N3 from the air and convert it to a usable form for the plant as the plant calls for nitrogen. So once you get Invita into that plant, it's going to replicate. It's going to spread from the roots up through the plant to the newest growing point. We're one of the very few bacteria that actually gets inside the plant cell. Beyond the yield increase, you're going to see increased root mass. The original fear was it's going to affect nodulation. It does not affect nodulation, but it almost increases it because of the expanded roots under that plant. With corn, you're going to see additional brace roots. All crops, you're going to see a healthier plant because there's no stoppage of that plant growing. That plant, as it demands nitrogen, is going to be able to capture it from the air and convert it into a usable form.
So for those who are interested, where can they go for more information?
To our website, exotic.com.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Hey, understanding the challenges you face, Nutrient Ag Solutions works with you to find the right solution every time. Nutrient Ag Solutions is one partner. They're all in. Visit nutrientagsolutions.ca to learn how their offerings work together to support your operation. Let's talk markets here on this Wednesday. We're joined right now by Neil Townsend of GrainFox, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. How are we doing today, Neil?
I'm doing well. I wish the Jets would have won last night, but hey, still not dead.
Are you worried yet?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Didn't score enough goals. Can't stop enough goals.
Yeah, Hellebuck's been a little bit disappointing, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's playoff Hellebuck and regular season Hellebuck seem to be two different things.
It could be worse. He could be Austin Matthews.
True.
Okay, so Neil, given some of the tight new crop ending stocks reported by USDA for soybeans, I believe it was around 295 million bushels, and corn's at 1.8 billion bushels. How do you view the potential for market volatility and direction here in the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two things. Like there's the fundamentals, which we're going to talk about, and then there's all the politics and, tariffs and trade and all those issues. So, I think there's going to be a lot of volatility because there's going to be a lot of the latter. But I also think you're correct to point out that there could be some volatility in and around the ending stocks numbers, because if we start with soybeans, 295 million bushels is on the threshold of being tight. If we see some weather or we see the circumstances such that exports or domestic usage kind of compel them to sort of nudge that up for 25, 26, I mean, you get into a scenario where there's less than 200 million bushels. And I think soybeans is pretty exciting. And the market reaction so far with soybean oil kind of rolling. I mean, people will say that might be for some other reasons, not just straight fundamentals, but there is the tinder for something to happen in the soybean and the oilseed complex. Corn also, I think 1.8 billion bushels is a interesting number because we're talking about a significant increase in acres. We're talking about a yield at 181, and all of that work increases U.S. Corn ending stocks only to 1.8 billion bushels, about up 300 or 400 million bushels from the year before. So imagine a scenario where exports have some incremental upside. They go up by 100 or 200 million. We have some weather that threatens 1 or 2 or 3 bushels an acre. And we're right back into that sub 1.5 billion bushel range, which I think is very supportive for the broader market.
Okay. Even for corn?
I think corn, as long as there's no significant policy change to the ethanol mandate, once you get below about 1.5 billion bushels, maybe the term shouldn't be very supportive. It is supportive. If it threatens to go sort of closer towards 1 billion bushels, then, you could get some excitement. And I mean, I think there's enough sort of weather issues right now. It's early in the season, not necessarily in the U.S. Corn Belt, but in other areas where you'd say, Mexico remains dry. It's drying out a little bit in the Black Sea region. The Chinese plain, the central Chinese plain seems to be very dry, giving them some concern about their wheat crop. So, just watching. And of course, unfortunately for us, I think there's some really weather concerns about the Western Canadian prairies and the northern plains of the United States. It's very dry there. So it's not hard to find, usage of corn going up by, say 3 to 5 million tons. That translates to about 120 to 150 million bushels. That ends up being somewhat supportive.
Yeah. Well, it's Mother Nature, and Western Corn Belt. You look at parts of Nebraska, all dry as well. Wheat. What about this? New crop wheat ending stocks 923 million bushels. Wheat market wise, hearing a lot of producers like, oh my goodness, the wheat price. What's going on here, Neil?
Yeah, I think wheat is, the big unexplainable, or I mean, it can be explained, but it's the difference in 24-25 that's kind of dampened wheat is that overall world demand seems to have slumped a little bit in terms of trade demand. So we haven't seen the level of imports. Now, that's a very rare event. If that goes back to where, we see a 5 to 10 million ton increase in world import demand, then, things get a little bit more interesting. Now, focusing on the U.S. ending stocks, it's sort of like the world residual. It's not really the key number. For the North American market, obviously going up, it becomes a little bit burdensome. But I think where we want to watch like what's the end result with Ukraine and Russia, both in terms of, their production, but also in terms of the trade and the trade issues. Like, we got the EU sort of many countries there sort of protesting, Ukraine's access to their markets, and that's a reflection on the fact that, wheat prices are dampened and feed grain prices are dampened right now. So farmers aren't necessarily happy ahead of a, new crop harvest, a little ways away, but it's coming and they know they're going to have more and they're worried that there's going to be a lot of Ukrainian. But I think like Ukraine itself, analysts there have started to cut their production back. The Russian production is going to be maybe the same as last year or slightly above or slightly below. I mean, there's still some key growing region time to go. And then we have the European Union situation, which looks like they're going to be bigger crops, but, the quality issue is still to be decided. It's still lots of rain in France and stuff like that. So, and, we know North Africa, the western part of that's very dry, Mexico, very dry. And as we aforementioned, North America doesn't look great right now for spring wheat.
Talk about the U.S. dollar index, and I heard a whole discussion this morning on Bloomberg Radio. Our dollar, your problem. How is this impacting some of the demand out there potentially going forward here in the rest of 2025 on ag commodities?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think if we look into the macroeconomic and the geopolitical sphere, I think one comment that I would make to all farmers is that, like, when we talk about 25, 26, for the Canadian marketing year, it starts August 1st. For the US marketing year for the row crops, it starts on September 1st. To understand what regime will be in place at that time in terms of the tariffs and the trade issues, it's hard to say because, I mean, it's a day to day, moment to moment issue. And I think the US dollar is also very, very tied into that. So we saw that, when they did do some discussion with China and they seemed to ease off the tensions there, we saw the US dollar sort of rally for a bit. Other people think that the US dollars, the trend will be down, and so we're going to see a stronger Canadian dollar, stronger euro, and we've seen that over the last several months. But I don't think I'm smart enough or have enough knowledge to know where the US dollar versus the Canadian dollar will be for the 12 months that constitute 25, 26. The Canadian dollar has been beat down for a long time. We've traded in that, sub 70 cents, but in reality, we've traded sort of in that, 70 to 74 cent range for quite a while. So do I think we're going to see a significantly weaker Canadian dollar? No. Do I think we're going to see a Canadian dollar that sort of like goes above 75 cents? No. So that leaves us in the same range. And I think that, how much will that impact our, behavior? I don't know. And then finally, I think, like, obviously, if we're going to have the tariffs and the US policy be sort of viewed largely as detrimental to their own economy, we probably think that means that the US dollar will continue to weaken. My only comment there is, again, like, September 1st is a long ways away, and we just don't know how important tariffs and trade issues will be in those 12 months. Like, they could be on to other things. It could be like, we did that. It's sort of resolved. So I don't know.
It's interesting. Well, we a lot of concern about inflation and what the Fed's going to do. But yesterday there were some inflation numbers out of the U.S. and really didn't look like any impact at this point, given what some of the expectations were.
Well, that's right. And I mean, again, like, the job of the market, I mean, even for grains and oilseeds, is we call them the futures markets, right? They're trying to predict what's happening in the future based on all the information they have today. And a lot of, again, I don't think Trump's policies are that well thought out. I think they're going to have a detrimental impact. But just because I think that, and millions of other people think that does influence behavior, but it also isn't sort of, the data is the data. So we're going to have to watch and wait to see what the data is as we go forward. And maybe it will be, worse or better than we think. It's hard to make a decision because this is a multifaceted world and we have a lot of variables in motion. So going back to something you said right at the start of this interview was, you said, like, will this contribute more volatility and uncertainty into the market? And I think that's the big thing that's sort of driving, negative inertia, is that there's just a lot of uncertainty and volatility. And, if somebody were to come to you and say, okay, the U.S. is going to make a major change in ethanol policy, like, you can't really completely discount that. Like, that's in the realm of possibility right now, right? Like, they could do that. I mean, I don't think they will do that, but they could do that. So, I mean, I just think, like, preparing for next year is going to be challenged by the fact that we probably should expect volatility and uncertainty. What does that mean? That means that probably, like, incremental selling, taking victories when you have them, like when you can sell above your break even and move a bit. Think about the total farm approach in terms of, like, I might sell a little bit more of this just because, it's offering good returns right now, and I'll hold back something else, using your storage strategically, which all Canadian farmers do. But just that kind of thing, I think, will be very important this year. It's going to be sort of an active marketing year. And the one thing I would caution farmers against is, don't feel hopeless. Like, obviously there's lots of things you can't control, but what you can control is, like, growing your crop as much as Mother Nature allows you, and then, just strategically thinking about its disposition. Like, how are you going to do that, and why are you going to do that?
Yeah, like, I think, last week the U.S. had their announcement of their UK trade deal. There was obviously talks with China over the weekend. I think that's where a lot of the eyes are from a commodity market perspective, is, if there is some sort of official deal, that is kind of phase one like, in terms of like being, the world's largest grain contract. The announcement of that is an opportunity of volatility from a news perspective to be watching out for.
Definitely. I mean, and again, remember, the world keeps spinning despite what the politicians are talking about. And one issue that might come up is if things are as bad as they look on weather maps for the northern China or the central China plain where they grow the wheat, China can kind of save some face by throwing the U.S. a bone and saying it just so happens we need some grain. Let's write in there that, we need 10 million tons of corn and 5 million tons of wheat. So there's lots of ways to kind of, peel the onion, I guess is what they would say. But I'm just saying it's going to be very interesting.
And it doesn't, I want to put this, the Russia-Ukraine war has, the market's just totally numb to it. Whether it's the war is ending or it's going to keep going or there's going to be a meeting or not a meeting, it doesn't seem like it really moves the wheat market in particular or some of the oilseed markets.
Yeah, I think what we've learned here is that, Ukrainian farmers and to a certain extent Russian farmers are extremely resilient. They can grow and produce crops under conditions that, you would think, how do you even keep going, right? Yeah. And, weather's maybe cooperated for at least the first 2 years of the war and giving relatively good yields, maybe not as much last year. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And again, the markets are very adaptable to what the conditions are. And I think the market right now is basically saying that, the war didn't disrupt trade as much as we thought it would. And probably the market is also saying that a peace deal won't disrupt the market as much as we think it would. So I don't think there's going to be, if the war gets settled, we might see a brief moment where wheat prices go down a little bit, but I don't think it will be a major drop. And I think, that will be out of the market in a few days. Now, again, I don't know if we'll see a trade deal. They're still trying to, get Putin to come. And I'm not sure if he thinks it's in his best interest, but there's something going on maybe in Turkey this week, or we'll see.
Meetings everywhere. Hey, quickly, I know we're up against the hard stop here, but I want to get you to comment on canola.
Yeah, I mean, I think canola, obviously, we're a little bit horse blinded here by the fact that we don't have a benchmark supply and demand balance that we can really rely on in terms of, it looks like things are going towards a negative carryout because the usage is so high, like if we were just to use straight Stats Canada data. But I mean, I think the expectation is that what we've shown here is that even when there are some hurdles and some, headwinds, the canola market is resilient. And I think we got to remember that it's a premium oil seed. The oil content is strongly valued. The meal is also valued, but the oil content is strongly valued. And we can find a market for it even when we have struggles with two of our main markets, the United States, A, and B, China. Now, I think the U.S. situation is probably going to be resolved, in particular if there's a lot of reasons probably for them to put restrictions on the used cooking oil. Beyond just mere like trade and tariff issues. I mean, that's a market that's, it's dirty oil to begin with, and it's sort of a dirty market. So you can see why they might do that. And I think that raises what, domestically produced soybean oil in the U.S. and also Canadian canola oil. So I'm pretty optimistic about canola right now. I think the price can hold. And then I think there's upside, especially if we start to hear these narratives about, a very dry summer or hot conditions in Canada, because I mean, there really isn't another crop that, the European crop or the Black Sea crop, they look ordinary at best, not something that's going to tilt the supply and demand balance.
Neil, appreciate you joining us here today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Shaun.
That is Neil Townsend of GrainFox. Hey, from nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, The Dirt, an economics podcast, is your place for farm smart topics to boost your profitability. Join host Mike Howell for season 4 of The Dirt podcast, available now at nutrient-economics.com. We have more Real Ag Radio coming up right after this quick break.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time for a product spotlight with Acadian Plant Health. We're joined right now by Holly Little, who is Acadian Plant Health's Director of Research and Development. Holly, it's great to chat with you.
Great to talk to you.
Biostimulants, there's a lot of interest in this product type right now. How are your biostimulants evolving beyond some of the traditional uses, and what makes your approach at the company stand out?
Oh, that's a greght question. We are seeing a lot more biostimulants, and we're seeing them become more mainstream, which is really great. I think it's due to a couple of different reasons, really both necessity and knowledge. So we know that environmental extremes are really making one of the hardest jobs around farming even more difficult. You just can't rely on what's happened in years past or what you expect to happen climate-wise, weather-wise, to affect your crop the same as it does in the past. And that's led to more uses of biostimulants to help cope with these challenging environmental conditions. But there's also been the need for really targeted approaches, novel technologies to ensure both crop productivity and sustainability. And when I say sustainability, I really mean both environmental and economic to the farmer. At Acadian, we've really been pushing the industry forward, proving claims with science, using third-party validation, and developing formulations that meet crop protection industry standards, assuring the quality and consistency the market demands. We've always been a science-based company, and we are continuing to use that scientific knowledge to expand the use of biostimulants to fit into crop programs globally to target specific grower needs, including soil health and nutrient use efficiency, in addition to abiotic stress tolerance. As biostimulants are better understood on a technical level, they become easier and more acceptable to adopt. We've invested heavily in research to better understand how biostimulants work in different conditions, different crops, and we've become more targeted in timings and benefits to allow more precise use.
So how do your biostimulants support growers in trying to get more out of their fertilizer and the water inputs that they're already using?
Yeah, so we've done quite a few studies on how our biostimulants can influence water and fertilizer uptake and use efficiency. We know that they can improve these parameters, but we're also understanding more and more about how that happens. So the mode of action. So how can we use biostimulants more efficiently for these benefits? We know that the application of our biostimulants affects certain processes and pathways in the plant that allows for these benefits. So, for example, under nutrient-stressed conditions, we've seen plants grow better, and this is caused by changes in gene expression that enhance nutrient uptake and nutrient distribution under nutrient-limited conditions, as well as enhancing metabolism. For water and water use efficiency, we've conducted field trials under water deficit conditions. We actually recently completed a 3-year study with a researcher at the University of California, Davis, where we saw when almond trees were treated with our biostimulants and then either irrigated at sort of full irrigation or deficit irrigation, they had higher stem water potential than their respective control plants, meaning that essentially, even though they were water stressed, there was more water in the plant, and that allowed them to function as if they were less stressed. The reduced watering didn't affect the treated plants the same way it did the control plants. Both water and nutrients are limiting to agricultural productivity and sustainability. And by enhancing plant growth and use of water and nutrients, biostimulants are one of the tools growers can use to navigate these challenges.
But we're hearing a lot more about regenerative agriculture. Where do your biostimulants at Acadian Plant Health, how do they fit into the bigger picture of soil health and sustainability as you've been discussing?
Yeah, the regenerative agriculture movement has become really big in most regions around the world. And it does mean slightly different things to different people, but ultimately it's about protecting our resources and investing in our resources for the long term, both environment and soil. So I think we're going to see more adoption of regenerative ag, at least components of it, if not full adoption. And a lot of that, I think, is going to continue to focus on soil health, which is really the foundation for healthy soils, for crop productivity, and how the soils influences crop productivity.
Yeah.
We've seen some great results when we've looked at soil health, and that's a good fit with our biostimulants in regenerative ag, because using our products can stimulate the microbiome, which results in enhanced microbial activity and abundance, in addition to the direct effects of the biostimulant on the plant. So this is really great because healthy soils support a productive crop, aid in nutrient cycling and nutrient uptake. In addition, healthier soils with a more active microbiome help the crop to resist abiotic stress. So you really get multiple modes of action direct on the plant and through the microbiome, and different effects of those. Soil microbes and plants work together to support each other and be productive.
Dr. Little, if somebody wants more information about some of the things that are going on at Acadian Plant Health, how do they do that?
Yeah, the best way would be the Acadian Plant Health website, where you can sign up for more information.
Thanks a lot for joining us here today for this Product Spotlight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Pest beware, your fields have heroes. The Pest and Predator podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn more. Going to play for you my conversation with Ethan Lane from NCBA. I was able to catch up with Ethan last week in Washington, D.C. A lot on the trade agenda of the Trump administration. Of course, that has there's some opportunities there for beef producers and beef exports indeed. It's always important, I think, as well from a Canadian perspective to get some sight lines on what is happening from a beef export perspective in the U.S. because those are the same markets that Canadian producers are competing with. So let's hear what Ethan Lane of NCBA had to say.
Okay, trade, tariffs, it's cheese all around. I guess from NCBA's position, what is your messaging right now on some of the tariffs that are being threatened from the White House?
Look, I think that it's important to look at this from the perspective of an industry like the cattle industry that has for years and decades now been used as a bargaining chip in these trade negotiations with foreign trading partners, whether that's, access to our market being used as an incentive for some other component of that deal, or whether that's capitulation on the terms of our access to somebody else's market, leaving us at a disadvantage with our competitors into some of those markets. So we've looked at the president's initiative here, and while we understand that reopening some of these discussions is problematic and risky for some of these trading relationships, he's trying to take on and address some long-standing problems that we've had with some of our trading partners. And we appreciate that he's using this tool to try to achieve a better position for us as far as our exports into those markets. We recognize this is a long road, and we want to make sure we're giving him all of the ammunition he needs, all of the data he needs to understand just what the implications are of one move versus another as he engages with this many countries at once. But we've had a really good track record of the president delivering on his commitments to the U.S. cattle industry when it comes to these kind of trade discussions in his last term. So we have a high degree of confidence that he has our best interest at heart, and he's using this tool to try to get us a better deal.
Okay, so say President Trump's here right now, and he said, okay, where do we need to focus? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Is there low-hanging fruit? What are those markets that you would like to see him provide a bigger opportunity for U.S. beef producers?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, it's looking at those markets where we should have access now and don't. Australia is a great example. We've had a trade agreement with them for 20 years. And during that time, they've had unrestricted access to sell beef into the United States. They've sold close to $30 billion worth of beef, mostly lean trim, into the U.S. market during that time. And here we sit 20 years later still being promised that the paperwork's on its way. And any day now, we're going to get that same access to their market. And even since this conversation has started, even since the president mentioned this particular problem during his Rose Garden speech, we've had the Australians continue to say, well, what are you talking about? We don't know what you mean. Well, what we mean is no one can ship fresh beef into Australia from the U.S. So it's time for them to deliver on their commitment from 2 decades ago and give us that reciprocal access. Similarly, I think there are a lot of countries that either were part of the old TPP that we pulled out of during the first Trump administration, a lot of those Southeast Asian countries. We were really happy to get that bilateral agreement in the last Trump term that gave us access to Japan. We're happy with that. We're happy with South Korea, but boy, a lot of business left that could be done in places like Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia. There are a lot of countries out there that could be potentially really good markets for us right now that are being serviced purely by our competitors or majority by our competitors. So there's a lot of different places that don't disrupt current really healthy functioning trade relationships that also create some new business and really put that tool to use and allow the president to notch some wins. So we're encouraging him to focus on those markets where there's some upside potential for the U.S. cattle industry. And that leaves Europe off the table. Obviously, the UK and Europe both, they love our beef over there. They just can't get much of it. So that seems like low-hanging fruit if I've ever seen any.
Okay, what about China? What needs to happen there?
So China continues to be, sort of the 900-pound gorilla in the room, right? So many different supply chains in the U.S. are looking at the impact of China either buying less of their products or, in our case, basically have stopped buying our products completely by delisting all of those plants, and then combined with that 145% tariff, we're not moving any beef into China that I'm aware of right now. We're hopeful that as the president has prioritized this particular discussion, given that it's so impactful, that there's going to be some resolution on that. He has said multiple times this is going to come to a close here. We're going to get a deal done. Everything's going to be okay in China. We're not as over-leveraged into that market as some other commodities are, and over-leveraged is probably the wrong word, but we're not as heavily invested in that market.
Overexposed, I know what you mean.
But certainly we have a big footprint there that has come all since the Phase 1 deal during the first Trump administration. Certainly that's business we would prefer not to lose in the long haul. But the fact remains that this is not just a beef in, beef out conversation with the Chinese. There are a lot of other moving parts that have nothing to do with us, and we recognize that.
Okay, so Canada's not shipping to China. U.S. isn't shipping to China. Is it Brazil and Australia?
That's our understanding. I think the majority of their products coming from Brazil and Australia right now. I think they get some from some other places as well. But certainly Brazil has at different points in the last few years shown that they're more than willing to step up and completely fill that gap with the beef that's coming out of their system down there. And certainly we're seeing a lot of that and have been for the last few years.
What's your positioning on what you want to see out of improved trade with Canada and Mexico?
Look, USMCA is doing what it's supposed to do. We've heard about this when it comes to automobiles. We've heard about it when it comes to protein. Our supply chains on the north and south side of the borders in many ways are linked. We send 400,000 to 500,000 calves a year from the east coast of the United States up to Canada to feed out. Then they're brought back down into the U.S. To be harvested. We have those cattle from the Mexican side that are basically U.S. genetics at this point that are designed to seamlessly fit into those feedlots that need those seasonally available cattle from Mexico to keep that bunk space full and keep store shelves full at different times of the year. So, we need that flow of cattle. It's not a massive amount in the grand scheme of things. You're talking about 5%, give or take, of cattle supply here in the United States. But boy, at the times of year that you really need it, it's critically important. So we're not asking for much in as far as repairs in that relationship. Yep. We'd prefer that, the White House kind of come to a resolution point on some of their challenges that are outside of our space and move on to some of those foreign trading partners overseas that we believe there are some issues to address.
Yeah, it almost get the same kind of tariff levels or trading arrangement that you have with Canada and Mexico. Take that to Europe and the UK and Australia.
Exactly. I mean, how do you improve on duty-free access, right? So we have that relationship now, looking at some of those foreign trading partners where either we're kept out by non-tariff barriers, and the president deserves a lot of credit here for continuing to talk about non-tariff trade barriers. I think in agriculture, we feel like we're screaming into the void sometimes talking about those non-tariff barriers. We forget, we have a 20% plus tariff going into Japan right now, and we're selling more than $2 billion a year into that market. We can operate in a tariff environment, but when you start to see those non-tariff barriers erected, those are economy stoppers. Those are the things that just don't allow a product to get where it needs to get in a holistic way. It's artificially manipulated at that point, for lack of a better term, and those are the things that we're really grateful the president's willing to take on head on, call them out, and see if he can get some from adjusting.
A lot of U.S. farm groups are saying, we want to give the president some runway on this. I hear that phrase a lot. Yeah. How long's the runway?
Well, I think that's one of those things that only the economy can make that decision, right? We're in a position where we have a very low supply of cattle already in the U.S. We're cyclically low. That's exacerbated by drought. We all know those conditions we've been dealing with for the last few years. That means that if you have cattle, it's a great time to be selling cattle, right? And we're seeing those numbers in the markets reflect that, even with some of that volatility. Yeah. I think that the marketplace is going to send those signals about when we've kind of reached that point where, we can't do any more of this. I don't think we're there yet. Certainly other commodities will get some help in the form of some market facilitation payments or something like that, like we saw during the last trade war. Livestock doesn't participate in those. So we have a much different set of math to be looking at there as far as what we need to be viable and successful in this kind of stalemate environment.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of cattle cons, and to see, to talk about some of the profitability that's in the beef sector right now at the feed yard level and at the ranch level, it is great to see.
Well, it's refreshing after all that our producers went through during COVID. Yeah. You look at the numbers on the board now and you think back to 2020, 2021, and just the hopelessness that I think a lot of people felt then. It's a great reminder in the good times, and this is the time to take stock of the fact that markets cycle. The cattle market cycles. You can set your watch to it. And certainly we're going to see this one cycle back around as well. And we'll be standing in this room 3, 4, 5 years from now, talking about, gosh, we have so many cattle, on feed right now relative to demand, and those metrics will turn over again like they always do. And it's our job to make sure we're looking ahead at the next problems and the next junctions in the road and make sure as an industry we're accounting for those and planning for them so that we don't get surprised by something that is incredibly predictable in nature.
Ethan, really appreciate you joining me here today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
That was Ethan Lane from NCBA from our visit last week in Washington, D.C. at the NAFB meeting. At Alliance Seed, every seed starts the story of your success, and our top-performing seed varieties are tailored to meet the unique challenges of your farm. Discover the Alliance difference at allianceseed.ca. We'll be back with more of RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management, and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, it's tagging time, and CCIA has you covered. Their online web store is your one-stop shop for approved beef cattle tags and pre-approved cervid and goat tags. Order anytime, anywhere. It's fast and reliable. Visit tags.canadaid.ca, your trusted source for traceability. We're now going to hear a portion of my conversation with Peter Chura. He's with Manitoba Hydro. There's been a few incidents as of late in Manitoba in terms of operating equipment around power or hydro lines. We need to be safe, everybody. The last thing we want is some sort of casualty because of something that could have been obviously avoided. Here's my conversation with Peter Chura.
That's right. Just last week, we had 3 occurrences in short order where farm machinery made contact with hydro equipment. On a couple of cases, that was power lines, sort of local distribution lines that got pulled down or brought the utility poles down with them. But in one case was even more serious from the business consequence point of view, in that the machine brought down an old transmission tower. So that took out about a quarter of Manitoba Hydro's transmission capacity for the couple of days that it took to replace that tower. But I have to stress, our main message here is safety. We were very, very fortunate that in all 3 of those cases, there were no injuries or fatalities, which can very easily happen. In one case, the farmer was smart about it. Once he hit the poles, all the lines came down, stayed put, stayed in his cab, called 911. He was in the cab of that vehicle for 5 hours until we could be sure that we made the scene safer to get out and not get electrocuted.
Right. Don't jump off the machine.
Right. Yeah, stay put, call 911.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what case. So if you do make contact, what do you need to do? So stay in the cab and call emergency services.
That's right. Call emergency services. Stay in the cab. Don't get out. You don't want to sort of complete the circuit to the ground, and it could easily be fatal if that occurred going through.
Are most of the occurrences happening in the like we're getting a little bit too well? We're like, say we're operating the sprayer, and we got stuff moving. We hit the line. Like, is it most of it's in field activity versus on the road?
It's a mix. Now, we've had, say, in 2024, it happens more often. You'd think 136 instances of farm machinery contacting an Manitoba Hydro equipment. In some cases, it's along roads. So a farmer going on and off road to and from a field is pulling down lines if their equipment is too high. But in the case of the transmission tower that came down, that was right in the middle of the field. So it's unclear why the machinery grabbed hold of the tower and hauled it down. Obviously, the farmer was there.
I'm assuming the answer to this question there could be some jurisdiction issues. It could be different depending on where you are. Say there is damage to that transformer. Is the farmer liable for the costs, or what happens?
In Manitoba, the farmer is liable for the cost of damage to Manitoba Hydro equipment. So that can obviously vary if it's one wooden utility pole brought down or an entire transmission tower. Obviously, what the costs would be going to vary there tremendously, but the cost is ultimately borne by the agricultural producer if they damage hydro equipment.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Peter, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot, Shaun.
Important stuff there. If you have any information, make sure you go to Manitoba Hydro's website or any of your provincial or state power authorities. Encourage you to keep in mind operating around those lines. Sometimes when you're unfolding equipment, you get a little bit too close. You make assumptions. Take extra precaution. Indeed. Remember, also, if you make contact, stay in the cab. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Keep that feedback coming on those cabinet selections. I love hearing your perspectives. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.